Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. If you remember, some time ago we did a video where we were converting a standard master slave architecture into a Galera cluster. So this time is a bit different. This time we are going to do the reverse, right? So we are going to be converting from an existing Galera cluster into a standard MariaDB master slave architecture. So over here we have a 3-node Galera already running. So as you can see here, the MaxScale output, MaxCTR list servers is reporting that we have three Galera nodes. And then we already enabled GTIDs because it's always good to have GTIDs enabled on your cluster or anywhere to make sure that we know exactly what's going on and which server is at which particular position. So let me maximize this window a little bit. So if I vi server.cnf file here, I would see that we have the standard Galera configurations. The only important thing here to take note is that these two lines, right? So we have defined a domain WSREP GTID domain ID, which is the Galera specific domain ID to 70, and then the Galera GTID is enabled, is on, right? So these are the two important things. As you can see here, the domain ID is 70, and then the server ID is showing as 7000. Okay, so if you scroll down, the rest of the things are standard Galera config, right? So we don't really need to worry about those parts, and because I am expecting that you should already have something like that. If we look at the MariaDB part, in the MariaDB configuration, we have the domain ID set to 1. This is the non-Galera domain ID, so that is set to 1, and then the server ID is set to 7000, right? So for Galera, you don't when you enable server IDs, so it's always important to make the same server ID across the nodes. But if you remember, for the master slave architecture, the server ID needs to be unique across the cluster, meaning if you have 7000 here, then you should have something else over here and something else over here. So these three nodes should have unique server IDs. Other than that, these are some standard MariaDB configuration. We don't need to worry about those as of now. But if I quickly take a look at server.cnf file over here on the second node, you would see that the GTID domain ID is still 70, sorry, and the other parameter are exactly the same. The only difference would be the local node setup. Of course, the IP for this local node is its own IP, and the name that I have given is also the name for this own node, right? So these two are going to be unique for the Galera configuration across the three nodes. Anyway, so scrolling down to the MariaDB part, you see that GTID domain ID is now different, right? So GTID domain ID is 2. Similarly, for this node, it will be 3, right? But the server ID is still the same, 7000. The rest of the things are also identical. So the only difference in this Galera configuration is, of course, if we look at the Galera specific config, is this particular part, right? Which is supposed to be different, of course, because this part represents the current specific node's IP and the node's name. And then in the server part, the only difference is the GTID domain ID, which we want to have as different for all the nodes. So when we convert these nodes to master slave, we'll see what are the things that we need to do. But for now, just take note of this, and I'm going to quit from here and quit from here. All right. So the idea behind what we're going to do today is to minimize the downtime, right? So minimize the downtime when converting or migrating from a Galera cluster to a master slave architecture. So that's always the main concern for every business or every database, that they want to have minimum impact on the application or the end users. So of course, when you want to convert, the simplest way would be to shut down all the nodes, shut down your application clients, right? So shut down your application servers, shut down the database nodes, remove the Galera specific configurations from the server, and modify the server side so that you have same domain ID but unique server IDs for all three nodes. So once you have done all these three things, then you start these three servers as standalone nodes, and then of course run change master commands to set up standard replication. And then of course for the MaxScale side, you will also need to make sure that you implement the master slave specific configurations, because currently clearly the MaxScale is utilizing the Galera monitor, all right? So that is not going to work anymore. So you need to have MariaDB mon, which is going to be the standard for, or which is the standard monitor for master slave architecture. So while we are doing all these things, remember that the servers are down, meaning the application is no longer able to connect to the servers, to the database, and do anything. So that is going to be the highest impact for that approach. But of course, it is easier to do. So whenever you want to have availability and then you want to do these kind of things, so that is going to be slightly difficult to do, but still doable. So we need to be very, very careful when we plan. Planning is the key, of course. So you need to plan very carefully, test it out multiple times in your test environment to make sure that you have the sequence dialed down correctly before you go and do the things in production or any critical environment, of course. All right, so what we are going to do now is I'm going to start up my application here. So I'm using sysbench, so it's going to be running for some 3900 seconds, which is going to be a very, very long time, and it's going to be using 4 threads to push some transaction to the cluster. So let's run it. All right, so it's running. We are seeing some transactions popping up on the screen. Yeah, give it a while. Yeah, some 400 plus transaction per second going on. So if we look at the output here, we can see that the GTAs are moving and they appear to be in sync. All right, so looking good. Let's do one thing. Because we now need to modify the MaxScale configuration so that we remove these 2 nodes from the MaxScale side. At least they are still going to be a part of the Galera cluster, because we want them to be replicating from whatever is happening on the master node on this particular server, because the application is pushing transaction to this Galera node 1, right? So we want to have that relationship for as long as possible. So I'm going to let's say I'm going to control C here. So and vi MaxScale.cnf file. Oops. Yeah, MaxScale.cnf file. So I have the Galera node 1, Galera node 2, and 3. They are all defined here in the configurations. And of course, I have the Galera monitor, which is using this Galera mon, and which is currently monitoring these 3 nodes, right? Similarly, if I look at the read-write service, the read-write service is also distributing read and write to all 3 nodes. Okay, so that's looking good. And then finally, we have a listener. That listener is currently pointing to or listening on 4007. This is the port. So if I look at my application connection string, you'll see that the port is the same, 4007, which basically means that this sysbench is actually pushing transactions to this read-write service, whatever is configured in the listener port. So that read-write service is of course this read-write service. All right, so looking good. So now what we want to do is we want to add some parameters here. I've already created that set of configurations. So the only difference here is that we are going to be using only server 2 and server 3. Sorry. Yeah, so we are only going to be configuring server 2 and server 3 for now. So server 2, server 3 for the read-write service also, and server 2 and server 3 for the MariaDB monitor as well. And then finally, if you look at the read-write listener, that is going to be listening to a different port altogether. But this listener is going to be listening to this particular server, which is this one. All right. So I'm going to be going to do a Control C here, go back here, and going to go all the way to the end of this file and paste it here. All right. So all those things are pasted, but we want to make sure that we have this server 2 and server 3 defined properly. So what we need to do now is go up, and for this server 2, Galera 2, I'm going to rename it to I'm going to rename it to server 2, and this one I'm going to rename it to server 3, right? And then from the Galera monitor, I want to make sure that I remove these 2 servers. And also from the Galera read-write service, I also want to make sure that I remove these two servers. So it's only reading and writing on Galera 1. And similarly, the monitor is also listening to only or monitoring only Galera 1, which is exactly what we wanted. Rest everything we don't need to worry about because we have already set up the MariaDB monitor with server 2 and server 3 configured, and the read write router is also configured for the server 2 and server 3, right? So that's fine. So I'm going to save and exit this one. So now, before I restart MaxScale, I want to make sure that I stop my application server. And so I'm going to stop my application so that this is going to be the planned downtime, right? So very small downtime. So I'm going to restart MaxScale. So MaxScale is restarted, and immediately I will start my application servers again so that the downtime is minimized basically. All right. So it will show the TPS, or yeah, so it's already back online and running. So very short and very quick downtime. So if I do watch MaxCTR list servers now, I should see that we have server 2 and server 3 now. Instead of Galera 2, Galera 3, we have server 2 and server 3 now here. And then of course Galera 1 still remains Galera 1. But the important thing here is that these two nodes are still replicating, because MaxScale is just a visual change, meaning we have just renamed, as far as MaxScale is concerned, we have just renamed the servers to server 2 and server 3 instead of Galera 2, Galera 3. But natively, meaning these three servers are still a 3-node Galera cluster, right? We haven't changed anything in the backend. This is only the visual representation of these servers. So that is why we can clearly see that they are still replicating and they are still in a sequence, right? In sync, proper sync. But the important thing we see here is that there are no connections to this server and this server, because there's no connection pointing to 4009, right? So which is my new listener port for the server 2 and server 3. So I have only defined, or I'm only connecting to 4007. That is why all the 4 threads are connecting to this particular node only. Okay, so this is settled. Everything looks good. So now what I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop this server and this server. So the server 2 and server 3 I'm going to stop. Stop MariaDB and and of course oops, looks like my session was stuck. Stop MariaDB. So this one also stop. So we can see that these two nodes are now reported as stopped, and they should not be getting any more GTIDs, of course, because only the master is running, right? So only one node is running and your application is still pushing data to that. So this basically what we are trying to do here is maximize the availability for the application while we are working on the other two nodes, right? So that's exactly what we are trying to do. So now first thing we need to do is we are going to be editing the server.cnf file. Scroll down to the Galera section and simply comment out these Galera specific configurations, because we are not going to be having this node as a Galera node anymore, right? So we are slowly moving it out of the cluster basically. And for the domain ID part, what we want to do is that we want to use a different domain ID now so that it doesn't conflict with any other thing. So I'm going to put a 10 domain ID here as 10. Server ID, because this node is going to be the second node in the cluster, right? So that's why I'm going to put it as 2000. Oops, sorry, 2000 here. Oops. Yeah, here. 2000. And for the durability part, because Galera takes care of its own durability, but over here we need to make sure that we use 1 here for the transition, flushing of the transition at commit 1. And also we want to make sure that our bin logs are sync every single transaction equals to 1. Yeah, so sync bin log equal to 1. Other than that, we don't need to change anything at all. So only the domain ID, GTID domain ID, and the server ID needs to be unique across the cluster now. So that's why we have put it as 2000. And then of course the flush bin log, the transaction commit is set to 1. If you are already using 1, good enough. But if you're using anything different, then make sure that you set it to 1. and sync bin log should always be set to 1 as well. Yeah, so this is done. I'm going to save and exit this one. And I'm going to do the same thing for the last node, right? So vi, okay, so this one, yeah, so I'm going to comment all these Galera node configurations, this one, and this one, of course. And finally, this domain ID, I want to make sure I use the same domain ID that I have defined just now for this node, which is of course 10. And then the server ID, I'm going to be using 3000 here. This one was 2000, so this one is going to be 3000 now. So for Galera, we need to have same server ID for all the nodes, but for master slave, as you remember, we need to have a unique server ID across the cluster. And of course, the two other things we want to change it to durable configuration as well. Sync bin log equals to 1, and everything else is fine. All right. Yeah, looks good. And let's restart these two nodes. Restart MariaDB server. Restart MariaDB server. So you see now, because we don't have Galera config anymore, that is why it is not reporting any GTID at all, because the Galera configuration we have removed. So there were only Galera specific GTIDs which are no longer there in the server. And now this one is reporting as a standalone master running. It's just MaxScale, the way of MaxScale showing what these two nodes are basically. This is not necessarily a master as of now, and this is not necessarily a standalone server, but this is a standalone server. Yeah, so these two are basically standalone servers. All right. Yeah. So let's connect to this server now. I'm going to connect to MariaDB server, and I'm going to take a quick look at show. Are there any binary logs currently sitting in the server? Yes, there are many. These are from the old Galera. So I want to make sure that I remove all these bin logs. Yeah. So what I'm going to do now is, before I do that, of course, I need to do one thing. Show global variables like GTID. So I want to make sure that I have the GTID for the bin log position or the bin log state, right? So any of this is fine because they're necessarily going to be the same. So I'm going to copy this number, Control C, and I'm going to put it somewhere in my notepad so that I don't forget this. Same thing, I'm going to connect to the third server also, and not bin log, GTID. So this one I'm going to also copy the number. Again, this number should be the same, so it doesn't matter which one you copy, it should be the same. And this one is node 2, and this one is node 3. So just remember to take note that which GTID is for which node. All right, so now reset master. Let's do that. Reset master. So it is going to clear away all the bin logs. Reset master on the third node as well. And if I do the GTID command again on this server, it should report as empty, totally empty. Yeah, as we can see, there is no GTID and nothing, no information available on this server anymore. Same thing if I do on the third server, also nothing, right? So there may be a possibility where you see some GTID current position somewhere. That is fine. You don't need to worry about that. As long as these two things are reset, that's all we need. We really need. Yeah. Okay. So now one important thing we need to make sure that we have is the replication user. I believe I have already created that replication user in advance. So just going to take a look at that. I'm going to connect to the first node because that is still Galera, right? So that's still Galera. Let's do select user comma host from mysql.user. Let's check that out. there should be a replication user. Yeah, there's a replication user already there. If I do show grants for rep user at person, it should be grant replication slave and replication bin log monitor, and yeah, replication slave and bin log monitor is already there. Yeah, so this is the default default grants for the replication user that is required. All right, so just make sure that when you create a replication user, you can create this user before we start anything, right? So when everything is still a part of Galera cluster, you should be creating this replication user at that time, right? So now if I run the same command on the second server, this user should also exist here. Yeah, and also this user should also exist here. Because why is it existing here? Because I did that when the cluster was running as a normal Galera cluster. So that's why all these things are replicated over to all the 3 nodes, which is exactly what we want to have. All right, so anyway, so the important thing is that this user exists on all the 3 nodes. Now what we are going to do now is, now you also notice that the replication is still working, right? So application is still connecting to the Galera, so there's no downtime for the application. It is working well. So this first node is of course Galera. We are not going to touch it, but on the second node, I want to I will run the change master command here. So what is the thing that I want to do now is that this node, this particular server, should become a slave of this particular server. So this is a Galera cluster, right? So this is a Galera node, but I want to have a standard MariaDB server running as a slave of a Galera node, not a Galera replication, but standard master slave using the GTID based replication. So that's exactly what we're going to do. So before we do that, what I'm going to do now is that I'm going to copy this GTID from the node 1 that we copied earlier on, Control C here, and I'm going to do a set global GTID slave position equals to, in single quotes, paste this one. Okay, so GTID slave position is okay, so the slave is somehow running. I need to stop slave and I'm going to set this GTID slave position equals to this number. All right, so this is currently set. Why was it running as a slave? Let's check it out. Okay, so my bad. I'm doing the same mistake again. Yeah. Okay. This is running as a slave, but I should have done this on this server. So I accidentally did this on this server. Okay, so set global GTD slave position equal to something. So that doesn't matter. Wherever this is going to be fine because it's a Galera cluster. Is still running. Is not going to be impacted by any of these things as whatever we have done here. I think that is why we saw this. We got this warning. Okay. So anyway, never mind. Reset slave wall. I'm just going to reset slave wall. So it's not a slave of anything. So it's just going to run as a standard Galera node, which is what it is doing now. So you see the application is still working. There is no impact to the application, which is good. So I should have done that on this particular server, this one, okay, because I want to make this a slave of this particular node. All right, let's do that, and let's do it right this time. So I'm going to copy this GTID again, okay, and I'm going to do a set global slave position equals to, in single quotes, what was that number? Yeah, this one, and like that. Now you see there's no warning here. This is the expected output that we are supposed to see. Okay, so this slave position is set. Same thing, I'm going to copy the second number and Control C. Yeah, Control C here, and I'm going to do a slave position equals to, oops, here, set global GTID slave position equals to this number. Yeah, So these two GTIDs have been set. As we can see here, MaxScale is also reporting the slave position, which is good. So now I'm going to do because I've already set the slave position, I can do a change master command now. Master host equals to, master host is going to be this master, right? This IP, the first Galera node. This one, master port equals to the default MariaDB 3306. Master user is my rep user, the replication user, and master password equals to password. And I think the last most important one, master use GTID equals to slave position. Yeah, so this is the important one, because we have already set the slave position, the GTID slave position. So we are telling change master command to that this particular node is going to be using the slave position for replication, right? So this is the important one. So once we do that and we do a start slave, we should see that this is now reporting as that this is the master, but this is a slave of an external server also. And then we should see the data coming in already from this Galera node. But it is far behind, but it is working already, right? So this is the important thing. Same thing, I'm going to copy the same exact command, because I'm the second the second node is supposed to be working as a working as a slave of this first node also, right? So I'm just going to copy the same exact command here, that I want this node to be the slave of this IP, this particular host, which is the first Galera node, right? Yeah, so that's what I'm going to do. Run this and start slave. So this will also report it as slave running, and then we should see the GTIDs are moving immediately. But now we see that they're moving, the GTIDs are moving very slow, because the replication by default is a single threaded operation. So what we want to do is implement parallel replication. Yeah. Parallel thread, I think, no, it should be something like slave parallel thread or something like that. I don't remember. Yeah, this is the one. So it's currently set to 0, which means it's going to be using one thread. So set, I'm going to stop slave, set equals to, maybe put it as 8 threads, and start slave. Oops, my bad. It should be set global. Yeah. So we have stopped slave, set the parallel application to 8 threads, and start slave. Now we should see that this replication should move faster, much faster. So I'm going to copy the same command also and run it on the third node. Yeah. All right. So it seems to be, it seems to be working well. Okay. So what thing I want to do here is on this particular node, because this is currently reporting as a slave, as a master running, I don't want it to be reported as a master. So I'm going to do a set global read only equals to 1. I'm going to enable this node as a read only node. This should immediately say slave running. So it's actually a slave. Yeah? So that's how it's reporting as a slave. And this one also, I'm going to put it as just to make sure that this is a slave. So yeah, so it is replicating. We'll just give it a few more seconds so that it can catch up. It is moving very fast now because of 8 threads. We can verify that. Show not slave status, but show process list. We can see that, yeah, it is, there are 8 slave workers now, right? So that's the thing that we wanted to see. And it can potentially implement or replicate 8 transactions in a single go, which is why the replication can work much faster now. It's almost catching up, right? So it's only something like 200,000 transaction behind, which is very 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 good. If I do a show, if I do a show slave status, we should see that it is going to report as some seconds behind master, which means that it is still behind master. It is still trying to catch up, but that seconds behind master is reducing very quickly. Let me increase the, sorry, let me increase this a little bit so that we can see, yeah, we can see the seconds behind master is reducing. We just want to make sure that the data is in sync before we move on to the next step. We can still do, but I just want to make sure that we are very safe and then we are not messing up anything. All right, so I'm going to pause this video and let it sync up first of all before we proceed with the next step. All right, so the replication seems to have caught up because we see the seconds behind master is 0. Okay, so now to the next stage of our adventure. Yeah, so I'm going to quit from this first node here and going to edit the, I'm just going to edit the config file, server.cnf file under etc my.cnf.d/server.cnf file. So again, just like before, now we are ready to disable the Galera configuration for this node as well. Right, so yeah, all the way here, and yes, so over here, I think the GTID domain ID we are going to set it to 10 as well, because we are going to follow the same thing. Yeah, 10, and this one we're going to put it as 1000. And just like before, this one we are going to set it to 1 and think bin log equals to 1 as well. So I think we don't really need to do anything other than this. Yeah, so looks good to me. So now what we want to do is we want to stop the application for the last time. So this is the only, this is probably the longest downtime that we will have for this particular procedure. So Control C, the application is down. The nodes are all in sync, 100% in sync, which is good. So I'm going to, I think we have already done everything that we wanted. The server ID is set, the transition mode is set, the sync bin log is set. So I'm going to save and exit this one. Oh yeah, the Galera configuration has already been commented. Yeah, it has. The server ID is also set to 1000. Yes, that's good. Oops, sorry. And now we can save and exit this one, and we are going to restart MariaDB server. Restart MariaDB. Okay. So it is running, but somehow it is reporting a wrong GTID. I think that is probably my mistake. I'm going to copy, because they are all supposed to be at this particular GTID. So I'm going to copy this GTID and connect to MariaDB server. So, and I'm going to do a set global GTID slave position equals to this number. Is it doing that? Yes, it has done that. And show global variables like GTID. Oh, sorry, should be like that. Yeah, so everything looks good. All the GTIDs are in sync. They are reporting the correct number. Now the only problem is that this node is still, MaxScale is still thinking that this node is a Galera node. but actually it's not anymore, right? So because the name itself is Galera, and this node is currently appearing in MaxScale as a Galera configuration, right? So what we want to do now is we are going to edit the, let me increase the size a little bit. Yeah, MaxScale or CNF file very quickly. I'm going to change this to server 1. Okay, so change this to server 1 very quickly, and I'm going to remove the Galera section completely altogether. Yeah, from starting from Galera monitor, I don't really need that monitor anymore. I don't need the Galera read write service anymore. I don't need the Galera cluster listener anymore. So we have everything that we need. Just one thing we need to do is to add server 1 here to this list, and also to our read write service I want to make sure server 1 is also added here, and that's really all that we need to do. Save and exit. You can prepare this config file in advance and then just simply swap that config file, so that the manual effort is minimized basically. Yeah, so I'm going to restart MaxScale very quickly and go back here, and this one should automatically report that this is a master running, right? So that's exactly what we wanted. So now to minimize effect on the application, what we want to do is we want to change this port back to the original one that the Galera service was using, right? So that there's no impact or no change required on the application side. So I'm going to restart it once more very quickly, and if I run that run my sysbench again, right? So same application or sysbench, and over here we should see the GTID is moving very quickly again. Now there's the one thing that you would notice is that the old GTIDs from Galera time is still there, right? So that's something that we are seeing here. So you can either choose to ignore it, right? Or if you want to, you can also fix it, but that one will require a little bit more effort. So if I run this show global variables command again, now we see that the slave position is, of course, the slave position anyway, this is not a slave, so we don't really need to worry about that. But the GDID current position is actually reflecting all these numbers. Okay, so how do you fix this situation now? You can do that, but again, you will have to, meaning we should have, or we could actually do this before we have started the application, right? So I can do that. I can show you how that is done. So I'm going to stop this application one more time. Yeah, we could have planned that earlier on, right? So yeah, but it's good that we are doing that now. So now when the servers are all reset, or rather the application is no longer working, all the nodes are in sync. So what I'm going to do now is reset master, okay, and reset slave all, and set global GTID position equals to empty string. So I'm going to reset the GTID slave position. I'm going to reset the master so that these two numbers are also reset. I'm going to reset the slave status also completely, so there's no more slave data anywhere, and I'm going to set the GTID slave position to an empty string. I'm going to do that on all the three nodes. So basically what we are doing is we are removing the replication completely from this architecture. So same thing, stop slave, of course, and this one, and stop slave, and this one. Now you see that this is no longer reporting any GTIDs whatsoever. So this, now what we are going to do is I'm going to run the change master command one more time, the one we did earlier on, right? So I'm going to use the same change master command again, because this is still my master, the 116, right? And then I still want to use the GTID slave position. The GTID slave position we have already set to empty, right? So which means that anything that is available on the master I want to pull down. We can do this now because all the nodes are already in sync, right? So we can do this safely. So I'm going to run this command, start slave, and also I'm going to run the same command on the third node as well. This one, start slave. All right, so now we should be reporting as all the three nodes are running as a master slave architecture. We can run, or we can restart the application one more time. Again, as I mentioned, we could have, or we should have done this reset earlier on, before we started the application for the first time. But anyway, it's good that we know how to do it. So application is running, and then we should see some fresh GTIDs being generated. And now we are basically running in a fresh master slave architecture using the same database, same data. So there's no impact to the data. The data is still the same as whatever was there in the application. As we can see that the sysbench workload is running fine without any issues. And then we can see the same throughput is being shown here, like 400 plus transaction per second for those 4 threads, right? So that's exactly what we expected. And if we do show slave status, we can see that yes, it is using optimistic parallel mode, and then the number of threads being used is, I think the number of threads would have already reset. Yeah, because this thing is not a part of my server configuration. So better copy this number, copy this line or this particular portion and put it in your server.cnf file. So what I'm going to do now is I'm still going to run this command here, so that it is using 8 parallel threads. So I'm going to quit from here, server.cnf file, and go down to this particular section, and then maybe add that line here. Yeah, number of threads equal to 8, or you want to maybe change it to a lower number of threads. That's up to you, depending on how heavy your application is. If your application is lagging behind, then you may want to increase the number of threads to a slightly higher number. And same thing, quit vi all the way down and put it here 6 7 exit. We don't need to restart because we have already set this variable dynamically on the server, and everything is looking good. So we should not be expecting any such slave lag. So slave status, yeah, the seconds behind master should be 0 always, right? So that's what we are seeing here. Also the number, the replication is working well, because anyway we are using 8 threads to replicate, which is more than what we need, because clearly our connections are only 4, but we are using 8 threads. But anyway, that's a different thing. So anyway, so we are good to go. Our Galera has been converted successfully into a master slave architecture with minimum downtime. Yeah, we could have planned it better, because as always my videos are not planned. I don't have any script that I follow. I just go along and do whatever I would do naturally. But always a good idea to plan this activity when you are doing it. Practice on your test environment, UAT environment, before going to the production, because now obviously now we know what to expect, right? We already know that there's going to be a scenario like this, so we should have planned that earlier on, and we should have done this command before even we restarted the application for the final time, so we would have avoided an extra restart. All right, thank you guys. I think hope this is all that we need to do, and we are good, and hopefully you enjoyed it, and take care guys. Bye bye.